Welcome back to the AI Corner. I'm stoked for Loren Thomas to join me today. Loren is the head of people, partner, and experience at TradeMe, so one of New Zealand's most revered companies and startups for a long time. So I'm very excited to have this conversation and hear about the AI transformation that one of our leading tech organizations has been going through, mainly from an internal perspective, but I'm sure we'll get a window into some of the AI capabilities that might have been put forward and delivered to market as well. But thank you for joining the podcast, Loren. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Let's dive straight into it. Why don't you tell me, what has the AI transformation journey been like at TradeMe? Gen AI has only been around for a couple of years. AI has been around for a long time, but why don't you start us off with what did it look like 2 or 3 years ago, the last 18 months, and how's that evolution going for the organization?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably the pivotal moment for us was sort of post-Christmas 2020 and sort of January 2025. Pre-Christmas, it was very much, no, we're not overly worried about this AI thing. It's not going to be a game changer for us. And our CTO came back, having obviously experimented quite a lot during his break, and went, this is going to be game changing for us. So we sort of went from no real strategy to, oh, we're going to need to do something here. And we started off like most companies do with no real plan in place. We didn't really know what people were using. And, so quite quickly we had to spin up and go, right, okay, this is serious. We need to know what tools people are using. We need to make sure that we're got the right things in place so that we're not doing anything bad with our customer data. So we worked with our legal and security and AI team to get the right AI principles and things in place and get clarity on what tools we were actually able to use and were supported here at TradeMe.
Awesome. So TradeMe is an internet business by nature. That's how it grew up. I mean, you've got a lot of tech savvy people in there. Is it safe to say that the organization gravitated towards AI pretty easily, or did you meet some resistance as part of that process?
It was definitely the real, change curve. We had those really early adopters and the fast followers, but we had a whole lot in the middle who were not necessarily using it, didn't know how to use it, didn't know what it was, were a bit afraid of it, or those who were actively sort of resistant to using AI. So we've sort of had the full curve of people that we've been sort of bringing on the journey of, hey, this is actually really good for us. And it's really exciting to be, one of the companies in New Zealand who's sort of more ahead than others in learning and growing in this space.
Awesome. And leadership from, you're in a people role. Typically, a lot of businesses start off with, or the CTO tends to take the charge because AI is a technology after all. How did you find yourself in that position in terms of driving this change at the helm of an IT company?
Really interesting. I am naturally very curious by nature, and sort of part of my job's to kind of think of the future. And as soon as I saw the value of AI in terms of my own personal workload, I went, oh, this is something here. And for me personally, I want to get ahead of the curve. I want to make sure I stay relevant. I want to know what this is about. And really understanding that, people were at different journeys of this, I realized quite quickly that it's not a tech initiative, that it's a people and it's a business initiative. So I took the mantle without authority, to kind of start driving AI adoption at TradeMe, and to work with our tech team, because that's not their thing, people aren't their thing, but to work with them to go, how do we actually manage this change and this transformation across our business?
And where did you start? I mean, you mentioned you sort of let people experiment and play with tools. Was it with the IT team first? Was it everybody? Did you see a willingness from certain, types of archetypes that were worth kind of doubling down on and investing in across the business?
Yeah, really interestingly, I managed to get someone to come in and speak to our senior leadership team. There was a company, a regional government, that were well ahead of us. So I got them to come in and talk about their journey, which really spurred quite a few people on. And I had a couple of our heads of marketing folk be chomping at the bit to get going. They could really see the value that this would have. And so my approach was to go where there was willingness. So those people who wanted to jump on, I was like, right, let me help you. Let's make this happen.
It's interesting, as you say, with marketing, they've got so much data at their fingertips that they can use across performance and campaigns and so many other sources. I suppose the challenge with any business is that you've typically got legacy tech stacks that need to modernize, or lots of data in fragmented tools, maybe even knowledge that, or often knowledge that isn't captured, it's all in someone's brain. And there's a whole change management process to surface that information to make AI kind of useful and valuable. Was that a challenge within TradeMe? I mean, recognizing that you are an IT company by nature, you'd imagine that the tech stack is pretty good and modern, albeit, you've still been around for some time now, but was that a bit of a gap to close within the business within TradeMe?
I can't talk too much to that from the tech side of it, but I do think that that's a gap that most businesses do need to close. And I think we've probably still got work to do there to go, how do we make sure our data's in a way that we can actually then get AI to make use of it? So where teams had the ability to do that for themselves, they have done.
Awesome. And you did mention when we caught up prior to the session that, you know, you had, on reflection, potentially wished that we'd scaled foundational training a lot faster. What was that realization for you, and why did things not go as quickly as you expected?
One was that sort of willingness and people really understanding what was possible with AI. So we have the Google Suite, so we had access to Gemini. And so I started working with our internal systems team to start reporting on what was our AI adoption rates. When we partnered with PwC and we got this sort of 1 day foundational training on board for them, which was really that basic, like understanding what an LLM does, how it works, so that you know how to prompt it well, and then moving towards actually doing a sort of mini hackathons to go, hey, of the work that you do now, what are some things that you think AI would be a good use case for? And what we saw from those people is one, the excitement and momentum when they actually saw this thing that has taken me this much time, I can now get a much better quality output if I put the time in to set up my prompt right or set up my agent right. And so what we saw from people that went through that training was one, a massive increase in their confidence with AI, and then a massive increase in their adoption of AI use. The spikes were just ongoing. And, even though that's not a proxy for quality of work, it was the proxy that we had at the time to go, hey, how well are these people using AI? So I think, we sort of went with the teams where they were willing, but I wish we'd pushed faster to get more people through that type of training from an understanding what it is and actually giving them time to experiment with the right sort of expertise in the room to help guide them, understanding their distinct use cases for their business unit or vertical or their job family or the type of work that they do.
It's an arm wrestle or a wrestling match sometimes, from what we see with leadership saying we need to change the business and the way we work using AI. Then you've got the individual contributors or the people on the front line saying, but I'm not a specialist, I don't know how this all works, I've been hired to do my day job, what I'm good at. How can you expect me to materialize more time just to start to reimagine how my work could be built, firstly, and then I've actually got to go and rebuild that work, and I've got to test it, plus I've got to do my day job, right?
Yeah.
And often my thinking is it's where you've got to have either a specialist in-house who can be that forward deployed engineer around the business and work with individuals to help them pair domain expertise with AI expertise to find those opportunities, so that one person is leveraging the skill sets of the other to implement those change, or an external party to help out with that. Did you find similar challenges? I mean, as you say, finding time and the space to do so, it doesn't just happen overnight. You've either got to be super enthusiastic where you take the time after work, and that's not possible for everybody, or you're a unicorn and somehow you can find the time during the day to do both your day job and rebuild the workflow.
Absolutely. I'd say that's still a challenge for us. What have been some of the really good successes is those teams that went early and then put in place really consistent practices for sharing, for learning from each other, from the wins to the fails, and building up their expertise. And so people within those teams like taking that responsibility and ownership. And I think when it's a shared responsibility, more people got on board and were able to troubleshoot for themselves. And then we've got, some really good people from around the business who are more experts in the AI space who would generously lend their time to go, hey, I can help you unblock this. Or, hey, that's a really good idea. Let me have a think about how we might do that. So I think that's been one of the, organically one of the better ways that we've seen that happen. I think we
Awesome.
could systematize it more though.
Yeah, I was going to say, have you formalized a center of excellence in some way, shape, or form where those who have either been volunteered or voluntold have basically put their hand up and they're going to lead the charge? Is that a formal process? And do you have quite mature intakes of use cases, an intake of use case model and governance models around that?
We are getting those in place. So we sort of, I just like to think of it like the wild, wild west, which we're now trying to put some guardrails in place and, make sure that we're capturing the right things so that we've, people aren't duplicating ideas or trying to solve the same problem, that where things are actually really impactful, that might be load bearing, where somebody actually has to upkeep it, or where the risk is actually quite high, or if it fails, it could be spectacular. So we are putting those things in place at the moment with that kind of how do we go safely but at pace. And so we have kicked off a centre of excellence. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment is how do we let people go at pace? Where do we put a little bit more rigor around it to make sure there is that accountability and ownership? Because we know AI is, it's a bit like an employee, it does need a lot of guidance. And then what are the ones that, are so important to us that create the most value, that we actually think they should be owned by Trade Me, have a dedicated person, resource, and have the right sort of structure around quality review for those.
That's really interesting to hear. And in terms of some of those workflows, individuals can find workflows and begin to rewrite their emails faster and automate some of their jobs. You've got some individuals who might be working at more of a team workflow level. Then you've got much more of that cross-functional business use case that probably the board wants to have purview of, or at least the execs to say, like, what is the ROI on this investment we're making in this bigger use case? How do you think about those buckets and basically bringing those all together so that the CEO can see something super tangible, but also the individuals are starting to see more of that toil on their day-to-day job to be reduced?
Yeah, absolutely. With the sort of the way that we're thinking about it is, and I did not come up with this, but as like a kind of blast radius approach, and thinking about it in two buckets: your AI artifacts, so your AI skills, your gems, your prompts, those kind of things, and then your AI projects, so agents that are actually working for you. From and we're sort of thinking about it, if it's just for you and your personal productivity, green lit, go for it. It's your accountability. You own it, you're responsible. For those team owned ones, we want to have a little bit of oversight so that we can go, hey, these are the guardrails that you might need to put in place. Here's best practice in terms of assigning an owner, making sure that if you left one day, someone else can take this thing on. And also so that we can surface those up and share across teams if they've got use cases elsewhere. And for, the trade me owned ones, or ones that we think are the right for the whole company, from an artifacts perspective, we're sort of going, hey, these are the ones that actually everybody needs. From a projects piece, that is where we are looking at where can we fully reinvent how we do some of the things that we do. So not just a, process tweak, but let's look at this from end to end and totally reinvent how we work using AI. And so that is where we've picked off, a couple of key territories for us to go, these are the ones that we think are the most important, and we're putting this sort of investment behind.
You mentioned a really important word there around artifacts, and to make sure we're speaking the same language, when you say artifacts, are you talking context and knowledge and files? Is that what in your world, is that what that means?
Yeah, so thinking of those, whether it's a Claude skill, whether it's, a trade me context prompt that, not people don't have to go and create their own one, whether it be this is a Claude skill on our power, like our slide decks that we use, or those kind of things is the artifacts that I'm sort of talking about, things that sort of can be scaled across.
Awesome. I mean, I feel like that's almost a full-time job for one person sometimes within a business, just to maintain all of that enterprise context, from contracts to marketing assets to reports to prompts and everything. We're now having to build, thanks to AI, you've got all that existing business context to manage, because that that native unit is just so critical for making sure agents can operate accurately and really start to do their job, which has been something that I suppose a lot of businesses aren't used to. How do we codify more of our, transcribing meetings? One of the most simple opportunities to codify more of the decision making within the business, but it's not necessarily an organic muscle for every organization from what we've seen.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that's definitely a work on as with AI, there's things that you now don't do. There's also now things that you have to do that you never thought you'd need to do. Those things in place is just very good practice. It sort of harks back to the data comment that you made earlier, which is, having good systems and processes in place and is so important with AI.
And just while we're talking about kind of workflows and governance models and centers of excellence and data, what have been some of your, I guess, biggest learnings from potentially some of the let's just say, weaknesses or errors that you've seen within the business that you'd recommend to others who might be just getting started on their journey?
I think getting started on your journey is all about experimenting. And I think that's where go learn, go play, like let people have some fun. But that has to turn relatively quickly because what you find then is the term AI slop or AI rot, or, and all of a sudden, all these people are sending you a 20-page research report just because they can, or giving you work that you're looking at and you're going, this is poor quality. You might have been able to do it quickly, but actually that's not what I would expect, and I would never put this in front of somebody. So you sort of need to move through that, hey, experimenting and learning, to going, actually, I still am accountable for the output here. So make sure you put the time in up front. And that's probably one of the other lessons I think is around time boxing, is when you
Mm.
have something, sometimes it's easier and faster just to do it yourself. But actually giving yourself a period of time, depending on the size and scope of the project, to go, you know what, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes to see if I can get AI to do this for me, or I'm going to give myself 2 hours and try it that way. So knowing the sort of scale of the piece of the work to how you time box what you're trying to do with AI for it.
And you got out something really important there, that you've still got to retain that judgment layer that humans have built up over time through our experience and expertise. Trying to offload that to an agent. We're just not at that level of maturity across most businesses. We don't have full view of context within the systems to support the agents with that decision making as well. Plus, it's still there to do a job. We can't just offload all of the work or cognitively offload all the work. Surely the mechanical tasks that we do day in, day out, which feel a bit repetitive, we should be automating more of those. And ideally, the agent at least does the first pass for the human to review. But that's such a skill set that I just hope that those who are getting started on their AI journey now take into account, rather than just blindly following what the AI says, or blindly, as you say, sharing what the AI has outputted, because all of a sudden a one-page reply that we used to get from certain individuals turns into 6 pages because they're now using Claude. That's just going to slow everybody down. That creates more bottlenecks within the business rather than reducing the toil that we were out setting to reduce.
Exactly. You've just pushed it further down the chain for someone to review. I 100% agree. And we do see it here. And I think, making sure people do take that accountability for what they are producing, making sure that they are still exercising those critical skills, because you use the term context. Context is everything, and AI doesn't understand context or subtleties or nuance. So you might ask it to do something and it's got all of this information and it's pulling what it thinks is the right things, but it might not necessarily be the one big nuance that you actually need it to be drawing on. So
Totally.
I think that's so important.
Well, it sounds like that hackathon that you ran or coordinated was pretty critical as well to moving the dial within the business and changing mindsets and educating others as well. Do you have a bit of a playbook that you follow for hackathons, or any kind of guidance you would give to individuals? I mean, you mentioned experimentation and time boxing being really critical, but what else have we learned from the hackathon that you would pass on to other leaders?
Yeah, I think for us, we came out with our AI vision in February this year, saying, hey, this is where we want to be over the course of the next year. And we surveyed our people to find out, how they were using AI and what was the biggest barrier, and that was time. And so the hackathon was a response to that. Hey, I just need time to experiment and play. So we didn't really have a playbook for this, because other hackathons that have been done, don't necessarily have the risk that comes with AI, where it is and can access data, or it might have a customer facing response. So we focused ours on internal enablement only. And some of the things I think that I would say are in the playbook is meet people where they're at. So we had sort of, hey, if you're still just starting out in your journey, now is the time to lean in and embrace AI. Don't worry about, sharing that you don't even know how to log in. That's fine right now. Let's just get you started. To those who are much more, developers who are, very technical, and then those in the middle. So we started off with some learning for people. We had swag, of course, that always goes down well. And then we got people pre-hackathon. I think this was really important. We got people to submit their ideas so we could cast that sort of risk and judgment lens over them to go, is this the right type of project for a hackathon? And we said no to some. We were like, well, no, you would just never touch that with AI. The risks are way too high. Or actually, that's customer facing. This isn't what it's about. And then that enabled us to also assess, hey, these are the ones you can just go and do it. absolutely fine. These are ones where, hey, there might be some risk. So we're just going to draw that out for you to make sure that actually, you know, you can get AI to recommend the decision, but you actually need to be the decision maker here and use your judgment and context that you have. To those that were like, this is really interesting, this could be quite game changing. How do we make sure that you've got the right support for whether it's integrations that are needed, whether there's, different things we needed in place? So we used the hackathon and we got lots of volunteers to either be assigned to an individual project or to follow particular projects and be check-in points for them to help them unblock as they got stuck.
And I think it's a really good shout, as you say, collecting the use cases up in advance, seeing where the team is at, what are the ideas they have. Don't even think about kind of business problems just yet. Just like what is the pain that's in front of them, or what have they been inspired by online that can give them some direction of where the technology can be applied. I think the interesting part is when you start to think about the fundamental difference between taking an existing process and applying AI agents to that process, or taking a process from scratch and designing it from the ground up for AI agents. I think that that gap between the businesses that go for the former rather than the latter is going to be a huge kind of void that's going to open up. Because as we know, the theory behind how we would build for an agent is quite different to how we would build for a human for that particular process and the different constraints that come with that. But I think it's very easy to look at a process and go, I'm just going to speed up these 10 steps of the process rather than looking at the process and going, one, should there be a process at all? Two, why do we have 10 steps when we could just have two? Why is the human generating rather than the AI generating and the humans approving or reviewing? There's that kind of shift in thinking doesn't quite happen overnight. I think, as you say, you can build awareness of it and consideration and start to learn the terminology in a hackathon, but you almost need a string of hackathons to get people to understand that journey that they need to go on to really shift the paradigm or shift their thinking of what's potentially possible with the technology.
I 100% agree. I think, it's really easy to get people into that first level of understanding how LLMs work and, what they do. And I think just going back to your other point before around output, you know, understanding that AI is going to give you the answer you think you want, it thinks you want, not necessarily the right answer. So actually knowing how to, use your judgment to go, give me the counterfactual here. To then into sort of this middle space, if you sort of think about levels of maturity with AI, you know, then moving towards sort of reinventing your own sort of workflows, that becomes relatively easy, but that step from there to really reinventing processes, because it's not just an AI skill, it's actually, how do you think about the work that you're doing and whether it's still the right work to be doing, what is the outcome that you are driving for, and going
Mm.
from an outcome perspective versus a this is the process that we run perspective. I think that mental model shift and then the AI skills to be able to make that happen is where I think that's sort of the next hump to get people over. And I'd say we've done a good job at getting some of our people over that line. And I say we've done a good job. They've done a very good job themselves of getting themselves there. But that's the bit that we're trying to go, how do we scale some of that now?
Awesome. Well, and you mentioned outcomes. So I'd love to touch on measuring success a little bit later on. But and then just before we do, recognizing that people's roles are going to shift, and obviously, naturally that relies on people and culture leaders like yourselves to really drive that mandate, that capability mapping and development process. People leaders and them getting started on this journey, where do you suggest they start? I mean, you've sort of shared your journey. On reflection, would you say the journey that you've taken in terms of driving experimentation, some hackathons, giving people the right tools, would you recommend that as a bit of a blueprint? Do you have reflections as to where other people leaders should get going if they were to begin on Monday?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a really nice, easy way to do it, because you're not putting pressure and expectations on people. If you're starting out with just experiment, learn, try some things, fail spectacularly, share the wins and the losses, that gives people a really safe entry point to go, I don't really know what this thing is and how I use it. And I think unless you've got that and you've got your people sort of bought into understanding that, hey, AI is fundamentally changing how I work and I can now see this, then I don't think you can get to that next stage of maturity, and where you can actually then start to spin it around and going, it's beyond experimentation now, it's an expectation. And even beyond that is, you need to use your judgment as to when you should be using AI because it has a cost too, right? Like, actually, should this be an AI thing, or should it just be a workflow change? Or should this be one actually where it should be a human because of the nature of what it is?
Absolutely. And thinking about individuals themselves, there's for some people, they see it as an assault on their craft, right? They were very good at reporting or elements of the design process potentially, or coding even, to go straight into where software is moving. And the capabilities they now have at their fingertips have meant that the expectations from leaders are shifting the way that they expect their people to work. We don't necessarily want our people crunching data like we did 4 years ago. We don't necessarily want people writing code by hand anymore, because that just won't keep up with the market and the pace that we need to be moving to keep parity. And of course, that can be a debatable topic for many, but I think we can see where everything's going, and a lot of people have either made that flip or are realizing that that's where it is going. As a people leader, how do you manage those expectations for individuals who might be quite attached to their craft, and sort of how do you take them on that journey of change management and seeing what the other side of the fence is going to look like in the next couple of years?
Yeah, it's such a good point because it is, we've got that across all parts of our business where people are fundamentally going, hey, the thing that I studied, the thing that I've learned, where I have spent all of my time growing my skills, what I am recognized for and celebrated for, now can be done by a machine.
Mm.
Where is my value? And that is really, really jarring for people. It's really jarring for someone who is really good with Excel, and then I can come in and get AI to do the same formula because I know the outcome that I want. Like, it's leveling the playing field. And so I think for people, it's recognizing that it is shifting and just really bringing that empathy towards that. And then starting to go, so what are the skills that got you to where you are now that are still relevant and are needed in this world? So for encoding, for example, you still need to review the code. You still need to know what's the outcome you're looking for and making sure that you're doing that in the right way. So there are those human skills that we bring and those technical skills. It's just how we use them and where we apply them and how often is different.
Bang on. I think it's, as you say, evaluation. What are the current tasks and the work you do across your job? Where can we automate the toil and the stuff you don't like doing, and arguably that we don't want you doing? And then also, because AI has basically meant that the expectations or the level of quality or output that we expect has actually should have increased, right? We've got more information at our fingertips, we can do things faster. So the expectation of our people doesn't diminish, because we want them to be better at the things that only they can do. But as you say, it's sort of realigning those expectations, and sometimes taking away that safety net to say you're not going to own that task anymore, because you biologically you're not as good at that as potentially a machine. But over here, where you are very good because you've built up some years of experience, that's where you can apply your expertise and sort of be the hero in this story. But I think it's a really challenging identity shift for a lot of people, which I really do feel for younger people coming out of university as well, who haven't had the opportunity to climb the first couple of rungs of that ladder. We need to give them those opportunities to learn and to grow into their functions and their roles, where typically those mechanical tasks that we're going to automate were how they were basically went through that apprenticeship. So how do you think about that talent development pipeline for young people coming into the workforce and into trade me in particular?
I think that is such a challenge. And it is you see it with people when they get lazy with AI, right? They're not reviewing outputs. And that's those of us who have built up the years of experience through having papers red penned or whatever it might look like to know what good looks like. And so I think we've got an obligation to, when we are bringing new people in, and they've got an obligation on themselves to question and to go, what is the outcome I'm looking for here? What does good look like? How do I learn that? Who do I learn it from? And whether that be, there are sometimes you're in the manual or you're working with people to go, you don't just accept the first outcome that you've got, you critically think on it, and you build in steps where it is actually the human making the decision.
Mm, love that. And as you say, just because AI can do the job doesn't mean it should all the time as well, because that's that cost of the business you talked about, where we're just pushing things further upstream and downstream. But setting those expectations earlier, I do wonder if for some businesses, rather than automating every part of the workflow, we should maybe still retain some of that manual work for a junior to work on, to at least get the reps in. The same way that when you're at high school, you still write maths out in a textbook, but then you're going to use the calculator in the next class. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe that. creative or silly way to think about it, but I do wonder if making things unscalable at some points in the process for people on that learning journey is still an important way to go.
Yeah, I think that's something that lots of organizations and people are going to have to grapple with as we start move through this AI journey, because we don't want to lose. You only gain those critical thinking skills by actually having to critically think. So how do we build those in and make those simulations or make them real for people so that they can build that muscle?
Absolutely. And so, thinking about outcomes and measuring success, reporting and visibility, all fairly challenging. I mean, the tools are progressing, the platforms are maturing in such a way that we can now have better oversight of usage of tokens, prompts, all that good stuff, observability that we should expect, I suppose, if teams and businesses are using those platforms. But measuring the outputs, what is the yield behind the effort that's been sort of, how do we measure the success of what's been done within the platforms in particular? How have you thought about I guess, the measuring framework and the reporting framework for what individuals are doing with AI on an individual or a team or a business basis? And how are you kind of baselining that and measuring it? Have you managed to build a mature framework around that process? And are you proving ROI that you're comfortable with?
Yeah, short answer is no, but that's one of those things that, is always in the back of my mind. That's why we started with doing like, let's look at adoption rates.
Mm.
But now we've got multiple tools that we're using and people are using different tools for different things. That's hard to pull together. And then, token usage that's just about how much you're doing. It's not about whether it's quality or not. So we're trying to, through the hackathon projects that came through, and then any new projects that we're identifying that are coming through that centre of excellence, is trying to get teams to quantify the impact that it's having. So, hey, I've reinvented this process. What's now has taken 5 people 40 hours, once a month, is now taking one person, you know, 20 hours once a month. And then where is that time being reinvested? So what's the impact, customer impact that we're now able to have, or the backlog of work that we're now able to get through faster? And I think, in my head, we know that AI is going to change roles and team shapes and sizes over time. So I think there is something around looking at being able to kind of assess baseline workforce now, and then what does that look like in the future? All of a sudden, do you have more on your, for us, we've got clients. So do we have more people who are able to service our clients in that human relationship? Is that where you start to reinvest your people, or is it reinvesting it into, different services and products? I think that's the place that I would like to get to, is to be able to go, we've done all of these things and this is what it's saved, but also this is the value that it's now brought to us.
Interesting thought pattern as well behind, do you go and reinvent the work and then you reinvent the jobs based on the work being reinvented and it's successfully freeing up time and confirming the hypothesis that there was a lot of time to save or more value to accrue? That's why we now are going to go change the jobs. Or do you go and change people's jobs before you reinvent the work? And I think both can happen in parallel. I don't know. There might be some thesis and or theory out there within the people in culture industry to say no, you've just got to reinvent the jobs because we can see where it's going. But I would also argue that we just don't really know where it's going yet. So we might be able to outline the principles of how people will operate moving forward. But the job description itself still could look quite different based on maturity of the organization, how fast we're moving, readiness of platforms and data. We could be putting the cart before the horse if we redesign all these roles when, as we know, adoption of AI is much slower than what any statistic out there would lead us to believe. It's painful, it takes a lot more time and investment, and it's harder than most people think because we're sold that it's super easy, but we all know it's actually not. So I don't know if you have a point of view on that around redesigning roles before the work gets redesigned, or another angle to that.
Yeah. I so I sort of have this view that I think we're going to end up, at different points in time. But I think, we'll start to see some roles, we've already seen them, right? Roles evolving, taking on different responsibilities, different things, and, people just going with that, going, that's
Mm.
cool, I'm excited about it. But I think we're going to, relatively quickly-ish in the next sort of couple of years into where we'll have some static roles that will exist, but we'll be moving more in towards a, hey, we've got skills description. These are the skills that we want you to bring to the organisation. And, people won't be fixed to a role necessarily. There'll be pockets of people where, you deploy the right people onto the right project. And it might be that it's a comms with a engineer with finance that come together to work on a particular project where that would never happen unless so you might see much more of that where so then like people leaders jobs are around workforce management versus actually, hey, here's this is how I lead you right now. And I think that is going to create a huge number of dilemmas for organizations from a, well, how do you like recognize performance, how do you pay, our pay frameworks are all really designed to skills and experience, and you move up a level, and I think that could fundamentally shift how we work. I think the New Zealand employment law landscape isn't going to catch up anytime soon, so that as jobs are naturally evolving and changing, you know, do you have to do a restructure each time, or actually can you be more fluid so that as you are experimenting and trying things and you've got the right people, the right feedback loops in place so that you are getting all of that along the way so that you can kind of move at pace and people are on board with the changes as they're happening.
I love the sound of that fluidity, if I'm honest. As you say, to be deployed into a project or where value or an outcome is being created and dynamic, moving lots of people, working with lots of different people, different levels of maturity to solve problems. That it sounds pretty exciting. I think, as you say, there's always going to be a core part of the business, but there's going to be a larger flex layer of the organization where people are more comfortable being in either a contracting type position or using different skill sets at different times throughout the year to execute on different projects. What about in terms of you'll be familiar with again, the forward deployed engineer concept around bringing someone in who sits with teams and make sure that the platform is being built for their use cases, pairing them with the domain expertise. Role growth, that's a newish role besides Palantir had it for years, but it's now, the hottest role in Silicon Valley. But do you see a number of other new roles coming to fruition? And have you started hiring for those within TradeMe, or are you planning to go to market at a point in time with those new skill sets?
We're finding that that's happening in all sorts of places. So, a team might have been able to shrink down because of some AI use. It's actually created a need for new roles because of AI out there in the wild that we're like, oh, now we need to have these types of roles that do these things for us. So I think we're just going to see that quite constantly, like not just in tech, but in sort of all areas of the business where there's roles that we didn't even know we needed
Mm.
that are now real. And that's what's happened through every big change like this, right? Everyone thought the internet was going to remove all roles. Well, it didn't. It changed them significantly. Everyone went from, product manager to digital product manager, and now they're just back to product managers again. So I think we will see some of that shift and change.
Yeah, and it's shifted the dynamic of the business. Like we're all aware of the demand for software is only increasing, even though it's become easier to code, which a lot of people weren't familiar with Jevons paradox before the whole Gen AI, transformation that when something becomes cheaper and more readily accessible, we demand more of it. I think we're going to see the same type of impact on the design market as well. We haven't seen a huge uplift in design roles in the past couple of years, but I'd imagine it's going to be as design capabilities improve, we're going to see a bigger demand for more of that kind of skill set in the market as well. So I think the whole job narrative or the job apocalypse narrative is slightly overblown in my mind. Of course, there'll be some reductions in the types of roles that we have within businesses, but I only see a proliferation of work and businesses as a result of these tools becoming easy to use. They're being democratized in terms of access. The barrier to entry for this type of work is only getting lower as well. Of course, to be a specialist, you have to go deeper because if everyone can jump into a space, then you've got to be ahead of the curve. But that just means more specialization rather than being a strong generalist in some ways.
Absolutely. And I think then when you think about in the HR world, the soft skills or the core skills, I think there is something that we're going to see around the way that people operate, how comfortable they are with change, how learning agile they are. Because
Mm.
as new tools and technology emerge, you kind of have to jump on and learn this new thing or learn this new way of working and be comfortable in the ambiguity. I think those skills are going to become much more required and demanded within organisations, that people will be looking to go, hey, have I got someone that is able to flex, jump in, learn this new stuff? know when to stop, know when to retire something, know when to, stop flogging a
Mm,
dead horse. That I think those are going to be the skills as well that become much more, or that organizations will look for.
love it. Hey, well, Loren, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really fascinating conversation to get under the hood of how things work within one of New Zealand's top companies, and how you're thinking about driving transformation with the use of AI across the business, amongst everything else I'm sure you do in your day job as well. But yeah, really appreciate the conversation, and thank you for joining us on the podcast tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. Please subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and YouTube to hear more from other New Zealand and Australian leaders who are driving AI transformation across their industry and across their company. But until next time, thanks for joining us.